You're listening to the Alpha's Love Stories, romantic audiobooks that will make your heart race. Don't forget to subscribe for more enchanting love tales. The cold of the iron bars had seeped into my bones, becoming a part of me. 3 months, 92 days of counting the cracks in the stone ceiling, of flinching at every shout, of breathing air thick with despair and old blood. My name is Alara, and in the dungeons of the Bloodfang Pack, I learned one sacred rule. To survive, you must be invisible. You must be silent, you must be small, you must be nothing. Because if anyone knew, if anyone even suspected what I truly was, death in the fighting ring would be a mercy, a swift end. The alternative was a fate that made my soul shiver. To be hunted, captured, kept like a prized animal, my pelt more valuable than my life. A white wolf, the last of my kind, or so I believed. The fighting rings were the heart of Bloodfang's cruelty, illegal, vicious, and dripping with coin. They called it sport. I called it slaughter. Wolves from all over the region came to bet on prisoners, on slaves, on poor souls like me who had the misfortune of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I was taken from a merchant caravan on the Scarlet Road. The raiders, they were like shadows with teeth. The guards fell, the goods were stolen, and the survivors, we were sorted like livestock. The strong were sent to break rocks in the quarries. The beautiful were sent to places I dare not name. And me, a scrawny, silent girl with fearful eyes, I was deemed only fit for one thing: to die screaming in the sand for the amusement of a roaring crowd. So I played my part for 7 long years. Since the night my world burned and I ran alone into the dark, I had played the human. I had smothered the wolf inside me, buried her so deep under layers of fear and pretend that sometimes I almost believed the lie myself. My wolf was a ghost, a memory, a constant aching silence in my chest. And it worked. It kept me alive. It kept my secret safe. In this cage, surrounded by the ragged, desperate breaths of others bound for the ring, my human frailty was my armor. No one looked twice at the trembling girl in the corner. They saved their cruelty for those who showed spirit. Every day the handlers came, rough hands, cruel laughs. They would pick someone, drag them kicking and screaming, or silent and resigned, down the torchlit tunnel, the one that led up to the noise, up to the light, up to the sand. They never came back, not alive. We would hear it, you see, the roar of the crowd, a sudden deafening cheer that shook the very stones. Then silence, a terrible, final silence. We all knew what it meant. Another life extinguished for a handful of silver and a moment of thrill. My turn was coming. I felt it in the ache of my empty stomach, in the way the guards' eyes started to linger on me. I was running out of time, and when that gate opened for me, I faced an impossible choice, a terrible, dizzying crossroads. Step into that ring as a human and die quickly, or call upon the ghost inside me, shift, reveal the truth in a blast of white fur and primal power, fight to live, but in doing so, sign a warrant for a fate far worse than any arena death. I didn't know what I would choose. I prayed for courage. I prayed for a miracle. But in the Bloodfang dungeons, prayers were just whispers that the darkness swallowed whole. The decision was ripped from me on a night that smelled of coming snow. The handler's name was Kale, a man with dead eyes and a smile that didn't touch them. He wrenched my cage door open with a screech of metal that set my teeth on edge. "Up, little mouse," he sneered, his voice like gravel. "The crowd is hungry, and tonight we have a very special guest." He didn't elaborate. He just grabbed my arm, his fingers biting into my bruise-covered skin, and hauled me to my feet. I stumbled, my legs weak from disuse and poor food. I didn't beg. I learned begging only made them laugh. He dragged me into the tunnel. The roars from above were louder now, a pounding, living thing. The smell hit me: sweat, blood, adrenaline, and something else. Something clean and sharp and terrifyingly powerful, a scent that cut through the foulness like lightning. It made the hair on my arms stand up. Alpha King Lysander is honoring us with a visit, Kale hissed in my ear, his grip tightening. Alpha Borak wants to impress him, so you get to face Gorefang. My heart didn't just sink, it stopped. It turned to a block of ice in my chest and shattered. Gorefang, the champion, the monster of the ring, a shifter of pure brutality who left pieces of his opponents as trophies. They were throwing me, a seeming human, to their star killer. This wasn't a fight, it was a sacrifice, a theatrical execution to show their king how entertaining they could be. The blinding light of the arena flooded my vision, and the wall of sound from hundreds of throats hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled onto the sand, disoriented, shielding my eyes. And then I saw him. In the high royal box, seated like a king of old amidst vulgar opulence, was a man who commanded the very air. Dark hair, eyes of a stormy, piercing gray that seemed to see everything. He wore simple, dark clothes that spoke of true power, not gaudy display. Alpha King Lysander, his presence was an anchor in the chaos, a silent, potent force that drew every eye. And his eyes were locked on me, not with curiosity, not with bloodlust, but with a look of shock, of dawning, horrified recognition. He leaned forward, his strong hands gripping the railing, his entire body coiled tight. Why? Why was the Alpha King looking at me like that? I had no time to wonder. The gate opposite me crashed open, and Gorefang entered. He was a mountain of scarred muscle and pure menace. He didn't even look at me as a threat. He looked at me as a snack. The crowd screamed its approval, a sound that was almost maddening. Alpha Borak's amplified voice boomed out, oily and proud. "For our beloved King Lysander, a display of our champion's skill. Let us see what a mere human can do against the might of Gorefang." A gong echoed, a death knell. Gorefang shifted. Bones cracked, fur erupted, and where a man stood, a monstrous pitch-black wolf now loomed. He didn't charge, he stalked, taking his time, savoring my terror. The crowd loved it. They cheered as I scrabbled backwards, as I fell in the sand, as I desperately tried to put distance between me and those gleaming yellow eyes. He was playing with me, letting me run, letting me hope, making the final kill swear. My lungs were fire, my legs were lead. I couldn't keep this up. He lunged, a blur of darkness, and his jaws snapped shut on empty air where my ankle had been a second before. I screamed then, a raw, human sound of pure terror. This was it. The moment of choice. To die as the human I pretended to be, or... He lunged again. This time I wasn't fast enough. His weight slammed into me, crushing the air from my lungs. I was pinned, the gritty sand in my mouth, his hot, foul breath on my neck. I could see the drool dripping from his fangs. I could see my own wide, terrified reflection in his predatory gaze. In that instant, staring into the face of a violent, meaningless death, something in me broke. Not my spirit. The cage I had built around my soul for 7 long years. A silent scream erupted from the very core of my being, not from my throat, but from that ghost wolf inside. No! I would not die as a lie. The shift didn't come. It exploded. It was a nova of agony and ecstasy, of 7 years of suppressed power bursting free in a single cataclysmic moment. My bones reforged, my senses exploded, my human fear was washed away in a torrent of ancient, majestic fury. The arena fell into a silence so profound, so sudden, it was louder than any cheer. Where a frail girl had been crushed in the sand, now stood a wolf of pure, radiant white. My fur was like driven snow, like moonlight given form. I was as large as Gorfang, but where he was brute force, I was lethal grace. My eyes, now a luminous, glowing silver, met his, and for the first time I saw not hunger in them, but doubt, then fear. A collective gasp swept through the crowd, then whispers rising like a tide. White Wolf, impossible, a fortune, capture her, alive. Alpha Borak shot to his feet, his face alight with unholy, greedy glee. A white wolf in his arena! He was seeing empires built on my captivity. But before that greed could turn into action, before a single guard could move, a voice cut through the chaos. A single word, spoken not in a shout, but with such absolute, undeniable authority that it froze the very world. Mine. Alpha King Lysander was standing. His storm-gray eyes were blazing, fixed on me with a possessiveness that shook the stadium. That wolf, he declared, his voice ringing with finality, is mine. She is my fated mate. By the ancient laws, she is under my protection. Any wolf who touches her, any wolf who even thinks of harming her, will answer to me with their life. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. A mate claim, and not just any claim, a claim from the Alpha King himself. It was sacred, it was inviolable, it was a shield more powerful than any weapon. Lysander didn't wait for a response. He vaulted over the railing of his box, landing in a crouch on the blood-stained sand. He rose, his gaze never leaving mine, and began to walk toward me. Gorfang, confused, took a hesitant step back. Lysander stopped a few paces away, close enough that I could see the tempest in his eyes, feel the overwhelming power of his presence, but his voice, when he spoke, was surprisingly gentle. "I can feel it," he said, his words for me alone. "The bond. Can you feel it too?" And I did. Beneath the terror, the shock, the raw power of my first shift in 7 years, I felt a new thread, a golden, warm, unbreakable thread pulling me toward this formidable stranger. It hummed with recognition, with a truth deeper than any secret I had ever kept. I was trapped, not by cages or chains, but by fate, by a king, by a pair of storm-gray eyes that saw the real me even when I was hiding in plain sight. He had claimed me before the entire world. Now, what was I going to do about it? The arena was a painting of frozen shock. Hundreds of wolves, their bloodlust transformed into stunned silence, staring at the impossible scene in the sand. A legendary white wolf, and an alpha king who had just declared her his mate. The air crackled with tension, so thick I could taste it, metallic, like lightning about to strike. My own heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Mate? This powerful, terrifying stranger was my mate? The bond he spoke of? I felt it, yes. A strange, warm pull in my chest, a compass needle swinging wildly to point only at him. But feeling it and trusting it were two very different things. My entire life had been a lesson in distrust. This could be the most elaborate trap of all. Alpha Borak finally found his voice, spluttering from his box. "My king, this is most glorious revelation, but surely the formalities, we must verify such a secret claim." His words were slick, trying to cloak his seething disappointment in false ceremony. He hadn't seen a mate, he'd seen a treasure chest, and Lysander had just slapped a royal seal on it. Lysander didn't even look at him. His stormy eyes held mine, a silent question in their depths. He took one careful step closer, then another, moving as if I were a skittish wild thing. In many ways, I was. "I need to touch you," he said, his voice low, a rumble meant only for me, to solidify the claim in the eyes of the pack,
to make it official, so no one can dispute what you are to me. Will you allow it?" His words were a request, not a command. That, more than anything, made me hesitate. In this brutal world, no one asked, they took, they grabbed, they forced. Yet here was the most powerful wolf in the territory, asking. Gorfang let out a low, confused growl, shifting his weight. The sound broke the spell. Lysander's head snapped toward him, and the gentleness in his eyes vanished, replaced with a look of such pure predatory warning that even the champion fighter flinched and dropped his gaze, whining softly in his throat. The message was clear. She is mine. You are nothing. I looked from the cowed champion to the king who had cowed him. I looked at the greedy gleam still in Borak's eyes. I had no allies here, no safe path, only choices between different kinds of danger. Trusting Lysander was a leap into a fathomless dark, but staying here, that was a slow, certain death, or a fate of gilded captivity that was worse. The bond inside me pulsed, warm and insistent, a lifeline thrown into a raging sea. Slowly, ever so slowly, I lowered my magnificent white head. A gesture of submission? No, a gesture of temporary, desperate alliance. A ripple went through the crowd. Lysander's expression softened just a fraction. He closed the final distance between us. His hand, strong and calloused, came to rest gently between my ears, on the crown of my head. The moment his skin touched my fur, the world dissolved. It wasn't just a touch, it was a connection. The warm pull in my chest erupted into a blazing sun. Images, feelings, sensations that weren't my own flooded through me. A fierce, protective rage when he first saw me in the arena. A stunning, breathless awe when my white fur erupted in the torchlight. A profound, bone-deep certainty that shook him to his core. Mate. Mine. A low rumble started in my own chest, a purr of pure, instinctual recognition I couldn't suppress. My wolf, silent for so long, was howling inside me. Yes, ours!
Lysander's fingers tightened slightly in my fur. His eyes slid shut for a heartbeat, and when they opened, the storm in them had calmed into something warmer, something sure. "It is real," he breathed, the words almost a sigh of relief. Then his voice hardened, lifting to carry across the silent arena. "The bond is acknowledged and accepted. By the moon and the ancient laws, she is under my protection, my mate." He turned, his hand still resting on me, facing Borak. "I am taking her from this place, now. Any wolf who moves to stop me declares war not just on me, but on the sanctity of the mate bond itself. Choose your next action very, very carefully, Alpha Borak." It was a masterstroke. He wasn't just invoking his own power, he was invoking the most sacred tenet of our kind. To challenge a true mate claim was to challenge the goddess herself. Borak's face contorted, fury and greed warring with cold political sense. He was a snake, but not a stupid one. He forced a stiff, shallow bow. "Of course, my king, the mate bond is sacred. We celebrate this miracle with you." The words tasted like ash in his mouth. I could smell the lie on him. Lysander didn't wait for more. He gave a sharp whistle. From the entrances, warriors I hadn't noticed before, men and women clad in dark leather and steel, their bearing disciplined and deadly, melted out of the shadows, his personal guard. They formed a tight protective circle around us, their eyes scanning the crowd for any threat. "We leave," Lysander said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He looked down at me. "Can you walk, or do you need me to carry you?" The question, so practical, so strangely considerate, broke through my daze. Carry me? I, a massive white wolf? I shook my head, the movement making the world sway. I was exhausted, the energy of my first shift bleeding away fast, but the last thing I wanted was to be carried like a prize. I took a step, then another. My legs held. "Good," he murmured. "Stay by me." We moved as one unit, an island of grim purpose in a sea of stunned faces. We passed through the gate I had entered in terror, back into the stinking, torchlit tunnels. As we passed the rows of cages, desperate hands reached out between the bars. "Please, my lord, have mercy. Don't leave us here." The whispers followed us, a chorus of the damned. I stopped, turning my silver gaze toward the shadows where pale, hopeless faces peered out. My heart clenched. These were my people, the discarded, the entertainment. Lysander followed my gaze, his jaw tightened. He didn't stop, but he looked at one of his captains, a stern-faced woman with a scar across her cheek. "Captain Varya," he said, his voice low. "Note this. All of it." "Yes, my king." Her eyes scanned the cages with cold, analytical fury. That was all, but it was a promise, a silent vow that this horror had been seen, and it would not be forgotten. We emerged into the biting cold of the night. Horses stomped and snorted, their breath pluming in the air. Lysander mounted a huge midnight black stallion with an easy, powerful grace. He looked down at me, waiting. This was it, the point of no return. I could run, into the wild, into the unknown. I was strong now, in my true form. I could vanish. But where would I go? Back to running? Back to hiding? The bond in my chest was a tether, but also a beacon, and the memory of those hands reaching from the cages held me tighter than any chain. I took my place beside his horse, my white coat glowing faintly in the moonlight. I looked up at him, the Alpha King, my claimed mate, a stranger who had shattered my world and offered me a new one in the same breath. He gave a signal, the guards mounted, and we moved, leaving the cheers, the blood, and the stench of the Bloodfang arena behind. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and frost, and him, Lysander, my mate. But as the fortress disappeared into the darkness, a cold thought followed me whispering on the wind. Borak's greedy eyes, Gorfang's confused snarl. This wasn't over. A claim had been made, but kingdoms were not held by words alone, and I had just become the most coveted, most dangerous prize in the entire territory. The journey to safety had only just begun, and enemies were already lurking in the shadows. The night was a living thing, cold, vast, and filled with the sounds of our escape, the thunder of hooves, the jangle of harnesses, the harsh breaths of wolves and horses pushed to their limits. We flew across the frozen ground, a dark river of urgency, with one spot of glowing white at its heart: me. I ran beside Lysander's towering stallion, my paws finding a rhythm on the hard earth. The physical exertion was a relief. It burned away the shock, the terror, the dizzying whirl of the last hour. But it couldn't silence my thoughts. Mate, claim, king. The words hammered in my skull with every footfall. Lysander rode in silence, a brooding statue etched against the star-flecked sky, but I could feel his attention like a physical weight, a constant, protective scan of the woods around us. His guards, Captain Varya's warriors, moved with a lethal, quiet efficiency, their eyes never resting. This wasn't just a journey, it was a tactical retreat from hostile land. After what felt like an eternity of hard riding, the dense forest began to thin. Lysander raised a fist, and the company slowed to a trot, then a walk. We entered a small hidden clearing bordered by a sheer rock face. A shallow cave offered some shelter. It was a defensible position. "We rest here until dawn," Lysander announced, swinging down from his horse. His voice was tired but commanding. "Varya, perimeter watches, double strength. I want no surprises." "Understood, my king." The captain began barking soft orders, and the guards melted into the trees like ghosts. Lysander turned to me. In the moonlit clearing, my white fur seemed to drink the light.
I knew I was a beacon, a glaring target. The thought made my skin prickle. "You should shift back," he said, his tone quieter now, almost gentle. "Conserve your energy. That first shift, after so long, it will have drained you more than you know." He was right. A deep, trembling weariness was settling into my bones, but shifting back meant vulnerability, nakedness, human frailty in front of this powerful stranger and his warriors. As if reading my hesitation, one of the guards, a younger woman with kind eyes, approached. She kept her gaze averted and held out a folded, dark, soft bundle of fabric. A cloak, a simple, profound act of courtesy. Lysander took it and nodded his dismissal. He held the cloak out to me, his back partially turned, giving me a semblance of privacy. "Take it. You are safe here." Were I safe? The bond hummed yes. My 7 years of ingrained terror screamed no. But the weariness won. I focused inward, on the human shape that felt like an ill-fitting costume. The shift this time was not an explosion, but a slow, painful unraveling. Bones shrinking, fur receding, the overwhelming sensory world of the wolf dulling to human levels. It left me dizzy and weak, kneeling on the cold ground, the cloak clutched to my chest.
I fumbled it around my shoulders. The fabric was thick, warm, and carried the faint, clean scent of pine and leather. His scent. It was strangely comforting. When I looked up, Lysander was watching me, his stormy eyes unreadable in the gloom. He had built a small, efficient fire at the mouth of the cave. He gestured to a spot across from him. "Sit. Warm yourself." I crept forward, wrapping the cloak tightly around me, and sat on the cold stone, putting the fire between us. The silence stretched, filled only by the crackle of flames and the distant calls of the night watch. "Ilara," he said my name. I flinched. I hadn't told him. He saw my reaction. "Your name was on the prisoner log, a human female, no value." He spat the last words, a flicker of the earlier fury returning to his eyes. They had no idea what they held. "And you do?" My voice was a hoarse rasp, unused for so long. "What do you hold, Alpha King? A white wolf? A political tool? A mate?" The word felt foreign and dangerous on my tongue. "I hold my destiny," he said simply, poking the fire with a stick. "And you hold yours. They are now intertwined. The how and why of it is the moon's business. Our business is what we do next." His practicality was jarring. "You speak of it so easily, as if finding a mate in a fighting ring is an everyday occurrence." It is not. He looked at me, the firelight dancing in his gray eyes. "I came to Bloodfang to gather evidence against Borak. His rings are a blight, a sickness. I intended to shut them down by law or by force. I did not expect you." He shook his head, a faint, bewildered expression crossing his face. "When you walked into the light, so small and afraid, something in my chest tightened. I thought it was rage at the barbarity. Then you shifted." He trailed off, the awe from the arena returning to his voice. "And the world made a new, terrifying kind of sense." I stared into the flames, his words settling over me. He hadn't come for me, he'd come for justice. I was a complication, a miraculous, dangerous complication. "What happens when we reach your kingdom? Your people? Will they accept a stranger? A white wolf from the fighting pits as their Luna?" The title felt absurd. "They will accept my claim," he said firmly, "and they will come to know you, as I will." He leaned forward slightly. "You have been alone a long time, Ilara. You see traps in every outstretched hand. I understand that. I will not force you, not into the bond, not into a role, but I will protect you, and I will ask for your trust in time." It was a fair offer. Too fair. My suspicion coiled tighter. And if I never give it? If this bond, if it fades?
"It does not," he said, a finality in his tone that brooked no argument. "They are eternal, but trust, that is a choice, a daily choice. You are free to make it or not." He stood then, his tall frame blocking out the stars. "Rest. Varia will bring you food and water. Dawn comes early." He began to turn away, then paused. "Sleep without fear, Ilara. No harm will come to you here. On my life." He walked to the edge of the clearing, joining Varia in a low, murmured conversation, leaving me alone by the fire with my churning thoughts and the overwhelming, confusing warmth of the bond. I ate the simple travel rations Varia brought, drank deeply from a water skin, and curled up in the cloak by the fire's warmth. Exhaustion pulled me under into a sleep filled with fragmented dreams, snarling wolves, golden threads, and a pair of stormy gray eyes watching me, always watching. I was jerked awake not by a sound, but by a silence. The night insects had stopped. The fire had burned low, and the bond in my chest, it gave a sudden, sharp tug, like a warning bell. My eyes flew open. Lysander was already on his feet, a silhouette against the rock, his head cocked. Varia materialized from the shadows, her voice a bare whisper. "Scouts, my king, from the east, not ours. They're moving with purpose." Lysander's gaze snapped to me. In 2 strides he was at my side, his grip firm but not painful, and pulled me to my feet. "Can you run?" he asked in a low, urgent voice. Before I could answer, a new sound sliced through the quiet, a long, low howl, carrying from a distance. It wasn't a natural wolf's cry, it was a signal, and it was answered by another, closer, to the west. We were surrounded. Borak. It had to be. He hadn't let his prize go so easily. Greed had outweighed his fear of the mate law. The cold realization washed over me. My first taste of the danger my presence would bring to this king. I had just become the reason his life was at risk. Lysander's face hardened into a mask of grim resolve. He looked from the approaching howls to me, his mate, the cause of it all. The peaceful clearing was now a trap of rock and trees, and dawn was still an hour away. The howls were a tightening noose, east and west, closing in. The peaceful clearing had become a death box of rock and trees. Lysander didn't panic. His movement was a study in controlled fury. He grabbed my arm, his grip firm but not painful, and pulled me to my feet. To the horses, now. Captain Varia was already a flurry of silent signals. Guards materialized, saddles were secured, the small camp dismantled in seconds. The efficiency was terrifying. This was a unit that lived on the knife's edge of danger. "Captain My King, they've cut off the North Trail," hissed Varia, appearing at his side. "The only clear path is south, into the Blackwood." A shadow crossed Lysander's face. The Blackwood. Even I, a stranger, had heard whispers of it. A tangled, ancient forest, where the trees grew too close, the ground was a treacherous swamp, and strange, feral things were said to dwell. It was a place wolves avoided. Another howl, this one closer, more aggressive. They were telling us they knew we were cornered. Lysander's jaw tightened into a mask of grim resolve. He looked from me, his stormy eyes assessing. "Can you ride?" I shook my head. I'd never been on a horse. "Then you're with me." It wasn't a request. He mounted his massive stallion in one fluid motion and reached a hand down to me. There was no time for pride or hesitation. I took it. His strength was staggering. He hauled me up in front of him as if I weighed nothing, settling me against his back. The heat of him, the solid wall of muscle at my back, was shockingly intimate. The bond between us flared, a warm, distracting current amidst the cold fear. "Hold on," he commanded, his voice a vibration against my spine. One arm wrapped securely around me, anchoring me. The other gathered the reins. "Varia, south, hard and fast, don't stop for anything," he roared. And we were moving. The stallion exploded forward with a powerful surge. I gasped, gripping the horse's mane, my body pressed back into Lysander. The forest became a blur of dark trunks and slapping branches. Behind us, the shouts and snarls of Borax hunters erupted as they broke into the clearing we'd just abandoned. The chase was on.
We plunged into the blackwood. The world changed instantly. The clean scent of pine was smothered by the smell of damp rot and stagnant water. Moonlight, our ally, was strangled by a thick canopy that turned the ground into a pit of ink and shifting shadow. The horses slowed, their hooves sucking at muddy ground, stumbling over hidden roots. An arrow whistled out of the darkness, thudding into a tree trunk inches from Varia's head. "Ambush!" she yelled. They hadn't just followed us. They'd anticipated our route. Borak was more cunning than I'd given him credit for. Lysander's arm tightened around me. "Down!" He shoved my head down, bending over me as another volley of arrows sliced through the leaves above us. His guards returned fire, the thrum of bowstrings and the cries of struck men creating a horrific symphony in the dark. His stallion reared as a wolf, a bloodfang scout in shifted form, leaped from the undergrowth. Lysander didn't flinch. With a snarl that was more beast than man, he shifted the arm holding the reins. Not a full shift, just his hand. Claws, long and black as obsidian, erupted from his fingertips. He swiped. A terrible, wet sound, and the scout fell away, yelping. I stared, stunned. I'd never seen a partial shift before. The control, the raw power, it was devastating. "Stay close," Varya barked, her sword flashing as she parried a blade from another hunter on foot. The clearing was chaos, the clash of steel, the snap of jaws, the panicked screams of horses. We were losing. They had the numbers, and the tangled woods neutralized our mobility. Lysander made a decision, a desperate one. He looked at a particularly dense thicket of thorned vines and ancient fallen trees. "There, it's defensible." He urged the stallion toward it, the great beast crashing through the brittle undergrowth. Varya and a handful of her warriors followed, forming a rear guard. We reached a small, semicircular hollow backed by a giant moss-covered log. It was a pathetic fortress, but it was something. Lysander dismounted, pulling me down with him. "Shift," he ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Your wolf is stronger, faster. You can defend yourself." This time, I didn't hesitate. The human was terrified, fragile. The wolf was anger. The wolf was survival. I let the change take me, the familiar agony a welcome focus. In moments, the white wolf stood where the trembling girl had been. Lysander gave me a swift, approving nod before turning to the breach. He didn't shift fully either. He stood, a king in human form, claws extended, eyes blazing with a feral light, as the first of Borak's hunters broke into the hollow. The fight was brutal and intimate. In the close quarters, it was tooth and claw, strength and desperation. Varya fought like a demon, her sword a silver blur. Lysander was a force of nature, moving with lethal grace, every strike precise and final. I fought beside them, my first true fight, not a spectacle, but a battle for life. My white fur was soon streaked with mud and darker, wetter stains. I felt a searing pain across my flank, a glancing blow from a dagger. It fueled my rage. I lunged, my jaws closing on an attacker's arm, feeling bone give way. Through the fury, I was aware of Lysander, always. A part of my mind was tethered to him. I knew where he was without looking. When a hunter lunged at his blindside, I was already moving, intercepting, knocking the wolf aside with my shoulder. He saw it. Our eyes met in the chaos, his gray, fierce, and acknowledging, mine silver and defiant. In that split second, we weren't king and captive, claim and burden. We were allies. We were a pack of two. But we were tiring. Our circle was shrinking. Varya had a nasty gash on her forehead, bleeding into her eye. One of our dards was down, not moving. Just as the tide felt irreversible, a new sound echoed through the blackwood. A horn, deep,
clear and resonant. It was not Bloodfang's crude howls. This was a sound of discipline, of authority. Lysander's head snapped up. A grim, triumphant smile touched his bloodied lips. "The Silver Guard," he breathed. From the depths of the woods, new figures emerged, wolves in polished silver armor, their movements synchronized, their formation flawless. They fell upon Borak's remaining hunters like a silent avalanche. The fight was over in moments. A tall warrior with a captain's insignia approached Lysander and saluted fist to heart. "King Lysander, we intercepted your trail and followed the signs of conflict. We are late. Forgive us." "You are exactly on time, Kalen," Lysander said, clapping the man on the shoulder. He took a deep, shivering breath, the battle fury leaving him. His eyes found me. "See to the wounded, and ready a litter. The White Wolf is injured." He came to me then, as the new guards secured the area. His human hand, now clean of claws, reached out and gently touched the bleeding cut on my flank. His touch sent a jolt through me, part pain, part that bewildering warmth. "It's shallow," he murmured, more to himself than to me. Then he looked into my eyes, his own filled with a storm of emotions, relief, fury, and something else, something deeper. "You fought," he said, his voice thick. "You fought beside me." It wasn't just an observation, it was a revelation. The sheltered, terrified creature from the cage was gone. In her place stood a warrior, stained but unbroken, and she had chosen, in the heat of the battle, to fight at his side. The first pink light of dawn was filtering through the cursed canopy of the Blackwood. We had survived the night, but as Lysander's silver guard began clearing the bodies of Borak's men, a cold certainty settled in my gut. This attack was just the beginning, a message. Borak would not stop, and my very existence had just turned a political dispute into a war. The litter was an embarrassing necessity. My flank throbbed with a hot, insistent pain, and the exhaustion from the shift and the fight was a weight dragging at my very soul. Lying on the cushioned pallet, carried between two of the formidable silver guard, I felt like a wounded prize on display. But the alternative, collapsing in front of the king and his warriors, was worse. Lysander rode beside the litter, a silent, brooding sentinel. He had washed the blood from his face and hands, but a new tension lived in the set of his shoulders. The attack in the Blackwood had changed things. It had shifted his protective duty into something darker, more personal. Borak hadn't just broken the mate law, he had dared to strike at the king himself. This was now an act of war. We traveled for 2 more days, leaving the treacherous Blackwood behind, for rolling hills and well-maintained roads. The Silver Guard, under Captain Kalen, moved with an impressive, silent vigilance. The air grew cleaner. The air lost the taint of fear and desperation I had lived with for so long. It smelled of turned earth, of hearth smoke from distant farms, of order. On the morning of the 3rd day, we crested a final hill, and there it was, Ironhaven. It wasn't just a fortress. It was a mountain tamed into a kingdom. Towers of sleek, dark gray stone rose from the living rock, defying the sky. Walls, impossibly high and thick, curved around the city below, which cascaded down the slopes in tiers of slate roofs and bustling streets. Banners of midnight blue and silver snapped in the crisp wind. It was powerful. It was imposing. It was terrifying. This was his world, a world of stone, steel, and law, a world I was supposed to belong to. A low whine escaped my throat before I could stop it. The men carrying the litter glanced at me, their expressions carefully neutral. Lysander heard it. He guided his horse closer. "It is a lot to take in," he said, his voice quiet. "But it is strong. It is safe. Within those walls, no one can touch you." Can they? I thought. Walls kept enemies out. But what about the enemies within? The politicians, the nobles, the wolves who would see a white wolf from the pits as a threat to their power, or worse, a curious trophy. We began our descent. As we neared the colossal main gates, people emerged, not just guards, but citizens, farmers, merchants, weavers. They lined the roadside, their curiosity a palpable force. Word had flown ahead of the king's return, and of what he brought with him. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through grass. Is that her? The white wolf. They say the king claimed her in Bloodfang itself. She's wounded. Look at the size of her. Their stares were a physical pressure. Some held awe, some fear. Many held a simple, burning curiosity that felt just as invasive. I wanted to shrink, to hide my gleaming fur, to become the invisible girl again. But there was no hiding here. I was the center of everything. The gates swung open with a groan of ancient iron. We passed into a vast courtyard. Here, the crowd was different. Nobles in fine wool and furs, warriors in polished armor, their faces a mosaic of calculation and scrutiny. This was the court, the real battlefield. Lysander dismounted. The silence in the courtyard was profound, waiting for his word. He didn't address them. He walked straight to my litter. He placed a hand on my side, near my wound, his touch firm and grounding. "Shift back now, Ilara," he murmured, his voice for me alone. "It is time they see you, not as a legend or a wolf, but as my guest, as the one under my protection. Can you do it?" The shift was harder this time. Pain flared in my flank, and the emotional weight of 1,000 eyes made my concentration waver. But I focused on his hand, on the steady, reassuring pressure. The world shimmered, contracted. Fur became skin. The overwhelming sensory input dulled. I lay on the litter, human again, wrapped in a borrowed cloak, pale and wounded, and utterly exposed. A collective gasp went up. I suppose they expected a goddess, a warrior queen. They saw a thin, bruised young woman with haunted eyes. Lysander didn't flinch. He reached down, and with a gesture of startling gentleness, he helped me to sit up, then to my feet. My legs trembled, and I leaned into his support, unable to help it. He kept a strong arm around my shoulders, holding me steady before his entire court. "People of Ironhaven, this is Ilara. She comes to us from shadow and violence, under the sacred shield of my protection. She is wounded. She is weary. She will be accorded every respect, every comfort as an honored guest of the crown. Is that understood?" It wasn't a question. It was an order. He looked at his nobles, his gaze lingering on a few specific faces, a tall, severe-looking man with cold eyes, an older woman with a sharp, intelligent face, daring them to object. The severe man, after a tense moment, bowed his head. "Welcome, Lady Ilara." The title was tentative, testing. The older woman stepped forward. Her eyes, a warm brown, swept over me with an assessing but not unkind gaze. "You need a healer, child, and a proper bed. The king's protection is one thing, my care is another." She smiled, a small, genuine thing. "I'm Althea, the royal healer, if His Majesty permits." Lysander looked at me, a question in his eyes. I gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. This woman, she felt safe, or at least not immediately threatening. "Thank you, Althea. See to her. The Sun Tower quarters are prepared?" "They are, my king," a steward said, bowing. Sun Tower. It sounded like a gilded cage, but Althea was already taking my other arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Lean on me, dear. Let's get you away from all these gawking peacocks." As she and Lysander helped me across the courtyard toward a soaring tower with windows that caught the afternoon light, the whispers began again behind us. But one voice, low and meant to carry only to the severe noble, drifted to my keen ears. "A guest," he says, "not a mate. Interesting, don't you think, Lord Balthazar? I didn't hear the reply, but the seed was planted. Lysander had publicly called me his mate in Bloodfang. Here, in his stronghold, he had called me his guest. Was it for my comfort, or was it a political calculation? The sun tower was indeed a tower, but the rooms within were airy and bright, not cold stone. There was a sitting room, a bedchamber with a window overlooking the whole valley, and a bathing chamber. It was the most beautiful prison I could imagine. Althea shooed Lysander out. Go, Majesty, you have a kingdom to reassure and an assassination attempt to investigate. I'll tend to your guest. Once the door shut, her manner shifted from formal to maternal. She helped me out of the cloak and winced at the bandage on my flank. Let's have a look at this mess. Her hands were deft and cool as she cleaned and redressed the wound. Clean cut. It'll heal fine. The scars on your back, though, older, crueler. Her voice softened. You've walked a hard road, Alara. I didn't speak. I just let her work. The simple clinical care bringing a prickling heat to my eyes. No one had tended to me like this since my mother. When she was done, she handed me a soft linen nightdress. Rest, sleep. The king will no doubt wish to see you at dinner, but that's hours away. You are safe here. The door has no lock on your side. After she left, I stood at the window, the vastness of Ironhaven spread below me. Power, order, safety, all offered by a king who was a stranger, bound to me by a force I didn't understand. He had called me his guest, not his mate. The bond in my chest gave a faint, confused throb. Was I protected ally, a political asset, or was I truly his destiny, locked in a tower until he decided what to do with me? Down in the courtyard, I saw him, Lysander, already surrounded by advisors, his face a mask of royal authority. The man who had held me on a horse, who had fought beside me in the mud, was gone. In his place was the Alpha King, and I was in his tower. The first move in a new, dangerous game had been made, but the rules were still a mystery to me.
Sleep, when it finally came in the impossibly soft bed, was a shallow, haunted thing. I dreamed of sand under my claws, of gore-fangs' hot breath, of golden threads that tightened into snares. I woke with a gasp to the soft glow of late afternoon painting the stone walls of the sun tower amber. For a dizzying moment, I didn't know where I was. The silence was different. It wasn't the fearful hush of the cages, nor the tense quiet of the forest. It was peaceful, and that somehow was the most unnerving thing of all. A gentle knock sounded at the door. Before I could answer, it opened to reveal not a guard, but a young woman with a kind, round face and nervous eyes. She carried an armful of fabrics in rich, subdued colors, deep blues, forest greens, soft grays. Lady Alara, I'm Mira from the Tailors Guild. The king, that is, healer Althea, suggested you might need suitable attire. She bobbed a curtsy, her eyes wide as she took me in. I was still in the borrowed nightdress, my hair a tangled mess, looking every bit the wild thing dragged in from the woods. Thank you, I managed, my voice still rough. Mira laid the dresses across a chair. They were beautiful. Simple and cut, but made of fine wool and velvet, nothing like the rough-spun rags I was used to. They were clothes for a lady, a guest, not a prisoner. The distinction made my head spin. Would you like to bathe first, my lady? Mira asked, gesturing shyly towards the bathing chamber. I can have water brought up. The thought of hot, clean water was a luxury so profound it felt like a trick, but my skin still carried the grime of the arena, the blood of the Blackwood, the scent of fear. I nodded. The bath was a deep copper tub. Mira and another servant brought buckets of steaming water, and when I sank into it, the heat seemed to melt the very cold from my marrow. I scrubbed until my skin was pink, washing away the last physical remnants of Bloodfang. But the memories, the scars, those were etched deeper. When I emerged, Mira helped me into one of the dresses, a gown of twilight blue that somehow made my silver eyes seem less haunted. She brushed my hair, drying it by the fire until it fell in a pale, smooth curtain down my back. Staring at my reflection in the polished metal mirror, I barely recognized the young woman mare. She looked fragile, noble, a carefully crafted illusion. Another knock. This time it was a guard, his posture stiff. "Lady Ilara, the king requests your presence at the evening meal in his private dining hall." My stomach clenched. The first test, not of strength, but of grace, of playing a part I didn't know the lines to. The guard led me not to a grand hall, but a smaller, wood-paneled room with a roaring fireplace. A table was set for two. Lysander stood by the hearth, out of his travel-stained leathers. He wore a dark gray tunic that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, his hair tied back. He looked every inch the king, but the setting was intimate, disarming. He turned as I entered, and his eyes, they did that thing again. The storm in them stilled, softened into something like appreciation and that deeper, bewildering warmth. "Ilara, you look—" He seemed to search for a word. "Restored." "Clean, at least," I said, the words coming out more bluntly than I intended. A faint smile touched his lips. "That is a start." He pulled out a chair for me. The gesture was so normal, so courteous, it threw me more than a command would have. I sat, the fine fabric of the gown whispering against the chair. Servants brought food: roasted meat, crusty bread, stewed apples, wine. Simple, hearty fare. They moved silently, their eyes carefully averted. The silence between us, however, was a living thing. He didn't press. He ate, watching me as I picked at my food. The flavors were overwhelming after months of gruel. Finally, he spoke. "How is your flank?" "Healer Althea says it will heal cleanly." "Good." He sipped his wine. "The quarters are acceptable?" "They are very grand." "You are free to go anywhere in the tower or the private gardens below. The guards are for your safety, not to confine you." He set his cup down. "I know this is overwhelming. A cage is a cage, whether its bars are iron or expectation." He saw it. He understood the gilded nature of my new prison. The acknowledgement, instead of soothing me, made me wary. "Why am I here, Lysander?" I used his name deliberately, testing the boundaries. "Truly, not as a guest. You claimed me as your mate before a stadium. Here you call me a guest. Which is it?" He leaned back, his gaze unwavering. "It is both. The claim is real. The bond is real. I feel it. You feel it." He stated it as a fact. But a claim is a declaration. A mating, that is a partnership. It requires trust, choice. You have given me neither. So you are a guest, an honored one, under my protection until you decide what you will be. It was a dizzying concept. Power offering choice. "And your court, will they accept a guest becoming a queen?" His expression hardened, a glimpse of the king who commanded armies. "My court will accept what I decree. But," he added, his tone softening, "it would be easier if they came to respect you for yourself, not just my word." He leaned forward slightly. "You are a white wolf, Ilara, the last in living memory. That carries its own power, its own awe. You survived Bloodfang. You fought in the Blackwood. You were not some delicate flower to be sheltered. In time, they will see that." "And if I never want to be their queen?" The question hung between us, dangerous and sharp. He didn't look away. "Then you will remain my honored guest for as long as you wish.
but the bond will remain, and I will still protect you with every resource at my command. That is not conditional on your title." I believed him. That was the terrifying part. The bond in my chest hummed in agreement with his words, but belief wasn't the same as trust. The attack in the woods, Borak? Without a doubt. Lysander's voice turned to ice. A clumsy, desperate move. He overplayed his hand. Attacking a royal party, challenging a mating claim, he has given me all the justification I need to move against him, publicly, decisively. "And will you do it?" I asked, searching his face. "Yes." The word was final. "But not yet. I need more than justification. I need irrefutable evidence. Alliances solidified. I will dismantle his empire stone by stone, and when he has nothing left, I will bring him to justice for every life he took in those rings." His eyes met mine, blazing with a promise. "For what he did to you." The intensity of his gaze, the ferocity of his vow stole my breath. It wasn't just political, it was personal. For me. Before I could respond, a different guard entered, bowing low. "My king, Lord Balthazar and Elder Selene request an audience. They say it is urgent regarding the incident in the Blackwood." Lysander's jaw tightened. The peaceful interlude was over. He wiped his mouth and stood. "You will excuse me, Alara. Duty calls." He paused at the door. "Rest. Explore the gardens tomorrow. The world will wait."
He left, and the room felt suddenly too large, too quiet. I was alone again, but his words echoed around me. Guest, choice, partner, justice. I walked to the window, looking out at the torchlit battlements of Ironhaven. A kingdom of order, plotting vengeance. A king of storm and promise, offering me a choice I didn't know how to make. And somewhere out there in the dark, a greedy, wounded alpha named Borak was nursing his failure. He had tried to take me by force and lost. What would a man like that try next? Subterfuge? Poison? Another sharper knife in the dark? The meal, the dress, the kind words, they were all part of a new arena, one with prettier walls and deadlier rules. Lysander said I was free to choose, but as I stared into the night, I wondered if the first choice had already been made for me the moment my white fur gleamed under the torchlight. The game was in motion, and I was no longer a spectator. I was a player. I just didn't know what my pieces were. The morning dawned clear and cold. Sunlight streamed into the sun tower, painting diamonds on the stone floor. The sheer normalcy of it was unnerving. No shouts, no dragging of chains, just silence and the distant murmur of a waking city. True to his word, Lysander had not returned. A silent servant brought a breakfast tray, tea, honey, warm bread. The luxury felt like a mockery of the hunger that still gnawed at my memory. I ate, each bite a conscious act of accepting this strange new reality. Mira arrived to help me dress, choosing a simpler gown of soft gray wool. "The private gardens are just below the tower, my lady," she said shyly. "They're walled, very peaceful. The king thought you might appreciate the air." Appreciate the air, not be allowed air. The careful phrasing was a constant reminder of my precarious status. Honored guest, caged bird. The garden was indeed walled, high enough to block the view of the city, creating a secluded world of frost-tipped hedges, dormant rose beds, and a single ancient oak tree in the center. A stone path wound through it. It was beautiful, sterile, and utterly silent. The only sounds were the crunch of my boots on gravel and the whisper of the wind. I walked, my breath pluming in the air. Was this freedom? To pace a prettier cage? My wolf, restless beneath my skin, chafed at the confinement. She wanted to run, to feel earth and forest,
not curated stone and sleeping flowers. I reached the old oak, its bare branches clawing at the sky. Leaning against its rough bark, I tried to feel the bond, to understand the tether that connected me to the king somewhere in the fortress above. It was there, a steady, warm pulse, but it gave no answers, only more questions. So, you are the fascination. The voice was smooth, male, and came from behind me. I whirled, my heart leaping into my throat. A man stood on the path, having entered the garden without a sound. He was perhaps a decade older than Lysander, with silver just threading through his dark hair at the temples. He was handsome, in a sharp, calculated way, dressed in immaculate robes of deep blue embroidered with silver. His eyes were the color of a winter lake, clear and utterly cold. This was the severe man from the courtyard, Lord Balthazar. I said nothing, just held his gaze, forcing my expression to stillness. A faint, condescending smile touched his lips. Lord Balthazar, head of the king's council. Forgive the intrusion, Lady Alara, is it? I was taking the morning air and heard you were here. I wished to welcome you to Ironhaven personally. His tone was polite, flawless, but his eyes were taking inventory. The simple dress, the pale hair, the wary posture, assessing my value, my threat. Thank you, I said, my voice flat. The king's protection is a mighty shield, he continued, taking a step closer. He smelled of ink and cold stone. One must wonder what requires such a potent defense. A guest from distant lands with such a unique presentation. His gaze lingered on my hair, the classic mark of a white wolf, even in human form. The king's reasons are his own, I replied, parroting the kind of formal evasion I'd heard in the courtyard. Indeed, Balthazar murmured, but a king's reasons affect the entire kingdom. Stability, alliances, the perception of strength. He clasped his hands behind his back. The attack in the Blackwood was most unfortunate. Some whisper it was not mere bandits, but a targeted strike. It raises concerns about what or who might have drawn such danger to our doorstep. The threat was veiled in silk, but it was a threat all the same. You are the danger. You are the problem. Anger, hot and sudden, surged in my chest. This man in his fine robes knew nothing of cages, of blood on sand. Concerns are for those who have the luxury of safety. I am familiar with more direct dangers. His cold eyes gleamed with interest. Of course, your ordeal. The king spoke of it vaguely, a most tragic tale. He took another step. We were too close now. I could see the fine lines around his eyes, the absolute lack of warmth in them. Tell me, do you find our kingdom to your liking, or does a wolf who has known the wild find our walls stifling? It was a probe, a test of my loyalty, my contentment. My almost instinct screamed to step back, to bare my teeth, but I held my ground. The walls are strong. The king is generous. Generous, Balthazar repeated, as if tasting the word. Yes, he has a habit of taking in strays. It is one of his more charming and more concerning qualities. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. A word of advice, guest to guest. This court is a complex mechanism. The king's protection is a powerful lever, but levers can be pulled by many hands. It is wise to understand the machinery before one gets caught in the gears. He was offering a warning and a threat in the same breath, implying Lysander's protection was fickle, that this court had teeth he couldn't control. Before I could form a retort, a new voice cut through the garden, crisp and clear. Lord Balthazar, I was not aware the king's private gardens were now part of the council chambers. Helen Althea stood at the garden entrance, with a basket of herbs over her arm, her expression deceptively mild. Balthazar straightened smoothly, his mask of politeness snapping back into place. Healer Althea, merely extending a welcome. The Lady Ilara and I were discussing the climate of Ironhaven. I'm sure you were, but the climate she requires right now is rest and quiet, the king's orders. If you'll excuse us. For a heartbeat, Balthazar's cold eyes held mine. A silent message passed between us. This is not over. Then he bowed, a shallow, perfect gesture. Of course. My apologies for disturbing your convalescence, Lady Ilara. We will speak again. He left, his footsteps silent on the gravel. The garden felt colder in his wake. Healer Althea came to my side, her warm presence of relief. That one, she said softly, watching the arch where he'd vanished, is a spider. He weaves webs of words and watches for the slightest vibration. Do not get caught in his threads. He doesn't want me here, I whispered, the confrontation leaving me shaky.
He doesn't want anything that changes the balance of power, Althea corrected, placing a comforting hand on my arm. You, my dear, are a hurricane in a teacup. He likes his teacups orderly and predictable. She gave my arm a gentle squeeze. Come, let's get you inside. You've had enough air for one morning. As we walked back toward the tower, I glanced over my shoulder at the serene, sleeping garden. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was a proving ground. Balthazar had just drawn the first line in the sand. And he was right about one thing. This court was a machine. I could either be crushed by its gears or learn how to make them turn for me. Lysander offered protection, but protection was a shield. It wasn't a weapon. To survive here, I would need both. The bond in my chest gave a sudden, sharp pulse, not of warmth, but of warning. I looked up, toward the high windows of the main keep. For a second, I thought I saw a figure standing there, watching. Then it was gone. The game in the garden was over, but the real game, the one played in stone hallways and whispered councils, had just begun, and I was utterly, terrifyingly unprepared. The encounter in the garden left me with a cold, coiled tension in my gut. Balthazar's words were like poisoned honey, sweet with courtesy, deadly with implication. I spent the rest of the day in the Sun Tower's sitting room, pretending to read a book of Ironhaven's history that Mira had provided. The words blurred before my eyes. All I could see was the cold calculation in that winter lake gaze. Lysander did not come that day, nor the next. The silence from him was a new kind of anxiety. Was he respecting my space, or was he entangled in the machinery Balthazar spoke of? The bond was a constant low hum, a reassurance he was alive, but it told me nothing of his mind. On the third evening, as dusk painted the sky in violet and gold, the quiet was broken, not by Lysander, but by Captain Varia. She entered without ceremony, her leathers worn from duty, the scar on her cheek a pale line in the firelight. Lady Ilara, the king requests your presence in the map room. Not the private dining hall, the map room, the heart of strategy. This was not a social call. Why? Varia's expression was unreadable. It is not for me to say, but you should come. Wear the blue gown. The order was subtle, but an order nonetheless. The blue gown, the finest of the ones provided. I changed quickly, my fingers flumbing with the laces. Mira helped me, her face pale with a nervousness that mirrored my own. Varia led me through parts of the fortress I hadn't seen, not the grand public halls, but narrower, older corridors lit by flickering sconces. The air grew cooler, the sound of the city fading away. We reached a heavy, iron-banded door. 2 silver guards stood sentry. They nodded to Varia and opened the door. The map room was exactly that, a circular chamber, its stone walls covered with vast, detailed maps etched on leather or painted on plaster. Continents, territories, troop movements marked with colored pins. A large, scarred table dominated the center, covered with more maps and scrolls, and around it stood the most powerful wolves in Ironhaven.
Lysander stood at the head of the table, his profile stern in the lamplight. To his right stood healer Althea, her arms crossed, looking grim. To his left was Captain Kalin of the Silver Guard, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. And there, standing opposite Lysander with an air of calm authority, was Lord Balthazar. 2 other council members flanked him, a gaunt man with spectacles and a broad-shouldered warrior with a scowling face. All conversation died as I entered. Every eye turned to me. The scrutiny was a physical weight. I felt the wild, caged creature inside me strain against the confines of the blue gown. "Ilara," Lysander said, his voice neutral, formal. "Thank you for coming. Please, join us." He gestured to an empty space at the table beside Althea. I walked forward, the sound of my footsteps too loud in the silent room. I could feel Balthazar's cold gaze tracking every move of mine. "We are discussing the situation in the Blackwood and the broader threat from Bloodfang territory," Lysander began, his eyes sweeping the room. "Lord Balthazar has concerns about the implications of the attack and our subsequent response." Balthazar inclined his head. "My concerns are for the kingdom's security, my king. The attack proves Borak is reckless, but moving against him openly could trigger a wider war with the Eastern Pax who profit from his rings. It is a delicate balance." His eyes slid to me. "And then there is the question of the catalyst." The word hung in the air. Catalyst, the cause, me. "The catalyst, as you call her, is under my protection, Balthazar," Lysander said, his tone dropping a degree. "That is not up for debate." "Of course, my king," Balthazar said smoothly, "but protection is one thing, the political reality is another. Her presence here, the nature of her uniqueness, it is a provocation. Borak's attack was the first, but it will not be the last. Others will come, for her. They will see your protection as a challenge, a prize to be stolen." He leaned on the table, his voice persuasive. "Would it not be wiser, for her safety and for the kingdom's stability, to relocate her to a more discreet location? One of the northern cloisters, perhaps, a place of peace and secrecy." A cloister, a hidden prison, out of sight, out of mind, where I could be safe, but also powerless, and more importantly, out of Lysander's orbit. My blood ran cold. Althea snorted. "You mean hide her, tuck the problem away so the court can sleep easier." "I mean secure her," Balthazar corrected, his eyes flashing. "The king's public claim, while legally sound, has made her a target. Every day she remains here in the heart of our power, she is a vulnerability, an assassin's dagger aimed at our very throne." The gaunt councilman nodded. "Lord Balthazar speaks logic. The risk is immense." The warrior councilman grunted in agreement. Lysander was silent, his face a mask. He was listening. He was actually considering it. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. I couldn't stay silent. The words tore out of me, raw and unfiltered. I stood in the sand at Bloodfang. I fought in the mud of the Blackwood. I am not a fragile secret to be buried. I am a fact. I turned my gaze to Lysander, forcing him to meet my eyes. "You claimed me before hundreds. You spoke of a partnership, of choice. Sending me away is not a choice. It is another sentence." The room held its breath. I had just challenged the council. In front of the king. I was breaking every unspoken rule. Lysander's stormy eyes held mine. I saw the conflict in them, the king weighing stability, the man bound by the bond. "Ilara."
"If I am a vulnerability here," I pressed on, the idea forming even as I spoke it, desperate and daring, "then make me a strength. You said I have power, that my survival meant something. So use it. Don't hide me. Show me." "And what would you have us show, my lady?" Balthazar's voice was dripping with sarcasm. "Your skill with a dagger? Your knowledge of court etiquette?" I ignored him, my eyes locked on Lysander. "Show them the white wolf did not break. Show them that what Borak tried to destroy, Ironhaven has made stronger. Let them see that your protection isn't a weakness, it's a declaration, that you shelter not a victim, but a weapon he helped forge. Silence. Complete and utter silence. Even Althea looked stunned. Then, slowly, a spark ignited in Lysander's gray eyes. A spark of recognition, of fierce, proud approval. The corner of his mouth twitched. He looked from my defiant face to Balthazar's coldly shocked one. A weapon, Lysander repeated, his voice thoughtful. He straightened, the king fully present now. Lord Balthazar, your concerns for security are noted, but hiding from a threat only makes it bolder. Captain Kalen, my king, double the guard on the Sun Tower, discreet but impenetrable. Varia, you will personally oversee Lady Ilara's security detail. Yes, my king. He turned his gaze back to the council. And we will not be hiding our guest. In 3 days' time, we will hold the winter feast in the Great Hall. Lady Ilara will attend, as my honored guest. Let the court see, let our allies see, and let our enemies see exactly what they are up against. It was a monumental risk. It was throwing me into the viper's nest of the court, publicly, but it was also a defiance, a statement. Balthazar's face was a carefully controlled blank. He had been outmaneuvered, not by the king, but by the catalyst herself. He bowed, the motion stiff. As you command, my king. I pray your weapon is as sharp as you believe. He swept from the room, his 2 allies following. The door shut with a heavy finality. Althea let out a long breath. Well, that was bracing. Lysander walked around the table until he stood before me. He didn't touch me, but his gaze was intense. A weapon? He murmured, from my ears only. I wasn't a flower to be sheltered, I whispered back, my bravery starting to fray at the edges now that the moment had passed. No, he agreed, a true, full smile finally breaking through his sternness. It transformed his face. His expression grew serious again. The feast will be a trial. They will stare, they will whisper. Balthazar's allies will test you. Are you ready for that? Was I? No, but I was more ready for that than for a cloister. I will be. He nodded, that approving light still in his eyes. Good. Then we prepare. As I left the map room with Varia, my mind was reeling. I had just changed the game. I had stepped onto the board myself. In 3 days, I would face the entire court, not as a hidden secret, but as a declared fact. But as we walked back through the dark corridors, a chilling afterthought echoed Balthazar's warning. Let our enemies see. Borak would hear of this. He would know exactly where I was. The feast would not just be a trial by court, it would be a beacon, and beacons, by their very nature, drew more than just admirers. They drew every predator in the dark. The 3 days before the feast were a strange, suspended time. The Sun Tower was no longer a quiet sanctuary, it was a garrison. Captain Varia and her hand-picked guards were a constant, silent presence. I saw the strategy in their placement, 1 at the garden door, 1 at the tower entrance, 2 patrolling the grounds below. Discreet, but undeniable. Lysander did not visit. He sent messages through Varia, a book on Ironhaven's noble houses, a note suggesting I might walk the upper battlements for a broader view. He was giving me space to prepare, or perhaps he was immersed in his own preparations for the political storm to come. My preparation was a different kind of battle. With Mira's help and under Althea's shrewd eye, I was groomed into a lady. I learned how to sit, how to hold a goblet, the basic rhythms of a formal dinner. It felt like learning a foreign language for a war I didn't understand. The key is, Althea said one afternoon, as she supervised Mira lacing me into a practice gown, it's not to know everything. It's to know that they don't know what you know.
You are an enigma. Use it. Answer questions with questions. Smile when you want to snarl. Your silence will frighten them more than any foolish words. And if they ask me directly about Bloodfang, about the arena, I asked, my voice tight. Althea met my eyes in the mirror. Then you tell them the truth, briefly, coldly. It was a place of brutality. The king ended my tenure there. Let the horror be in what you don't describe. Let their own imaginations condemn Borak for you. She placed a hand on my shoulder. You are not on trial, Ilara. You are the evidence. Present yourself with the dignity of a survivor, and let the guilty squirm. The night before the feast, restlessness drove me to the battlements. Varia accompanied me, a shadow a few paces behind. The wind here was a living force, sharp and clean, scouring away the scent of stone and anxiety. It carried the distant sounds of the city below, a bark of laughter, a clang of a smithy, life going on. I looked out over the sea of torchlit roofs towards the dark expanse beyond the walls, where the world was wild and unforgiving. That was the world I knew. This world of politics and perfume was more alien than any forest. He is taking a great risk, you know. Varia's voice, so close, made me jump. She had moved to stand beside me at the parapet, her gaze also on the horizon. She rarely initiated conversation. "The feast?" I asked. "All of it," she said, her tone blunt. "Claiming you publicly, bringing you here, defying Balthazar. Lysander is a strong king, but strength invites challenge. You have become the focal point of every challenge." She looked at me, her scarred face unreadable. "He believes you are worth it." "Why?" The question burst from me. "He doesn't know me." Varia was silent for a long moment. "I have served Lysander since he was a prince. I have seen him navigate assassinations, wars, famines. He is a man of logic, of strategy. The bond, it is the one thing in his life that is not logical. I saw his face in that arena, Ilara. It wasn't just political calculation. It was recognition, as if he'd been waiting in a dark room and someone had finally lit a lamp." He shook his head, a rare show of emotion. "It terrifies him as much as it terrifies you, but he will not run from it. And now, neither will you." Her words settled in my chest, heavy and true. We were both terrified. We were both standing our ground. The day of the feast arrived, cloaked in a grim, steel-gray sky. Mira worked on me with the focus of a general preparing for battle. The gown was the deep twilight blue, but over it went a sleeveless surcoat of silver-threaded velvet, the color of my wolf's coat. My hair was braided and coiled in an intricate crown, leaving my neck and shoulders bare. I looked regal. I looked formidable. I looked like a stranger. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see Ilara the survivor. I saw the white wolf of Ironhaven, a symbol, a weapon, just as I'd asked to be. A knock came at the main door. It was not Varia. It was Lysander. He stood in the doorway, and for a moment he just looked at me. His own attire was regal but severe, a black tunic embroidered with silver wolves, a heavy cloak of midnight blue fastened with a sapphire clasp. The king. But his eyes were the stormy gray of the man who had touched my wolf in the sand. "You are—" He seemed to search for a word again, but this time he shook his head, abandoning the attempt. "Are you ready?" "No," I said honestly, a ghost of a smile. "Good. Neither am I." He offered his arm. It was a formal, public gesture, the first of thousands we would make tonight. "Stay close to me. Listen more than you speak. And remember, you belong here as much as any of them. More because you chose to be." I took his arm. The contact, even through layers of fabric, sent the now familiar warmth of the bond pulsing up my arm. It was a comfort and a tether. The walk to the great hall was a procession through a gauntlet. Courtiers lined the halls, bowing and curtsying as we passed, their whispers rising like a swarm of insects. I kept my eyes forward, my chin level, my hand resting lightly on Lysander's arm. I could feel their stares like pinpricks. The doors to the great hall swung open. The noise and light hit me like a wall. The hall was vast, a forest of stone pillars lost in shadow high above, while below it blazed with firelight from a dozen hearths and 1,000 candles. Long tables groaned with food, the air thick with the smells of roasted meat, spiced wine, and expensive perfume. And everywhere, wolves. Hundreds of them, dressed in silks and furs, jewels glinting, all turning as one as we entered. The music stopped, the conversation died. A sea of faces all turned toward us. Lysander's arm was rock solid under my hand. He led me forward, down the central aisle, his stride confident and slow. I matched his pace, my heart hammering against my ribs so loudly I was sure the entire hall could hear it. He led me to the high table on a dais at the far end. He seated me in the chair to his right, the place of highest honor, traditionally reserved for a Luna or a visiting sovereign. A fresh wave of whispers broke out at the symbolism. As we sat, the music started again, tentatively. The feast began, but no one was eating. Every eye was on the high table. The first test came almost immediately. An older lord with a florid face and a booming voice, a known ally of Balthazar, raised his goblet. A toast to our king's safe return from the eastern wilds, and to his fascinating new companion. The toast was a barb wrapped in courtesy. Companion, not mate, not guest of honor, a subtle insult. Lysander's smile didn't reach his eyes as he raised his own cup. He took a sip, his gaze sweeping the room, daring anyone to contradict him. I sipped my water, my hand steady. Hidden treasures, a reclaiming of the narrative. As the meal progressed, the stares became less blatant, but the attention never wavered. I could feel Balthazar's cold gaze from a few seats down. I saw the gaunt councilman watching me like a specimen. I also saw other looks, curiosity from younger nobles, wary assessment from the warriors, and here and there a flicker of genuine, awed interest. Then a woman dressed in emerald green, with sharp features and a cunning smile, leaned forward from further down the table. "Lady Alara, we are all simply dying to know. The rumors are so wild. Is it true you faced Gorfang in the pit and lived to tell the tale?" The hall grew quiet again. This was it, the direct question. I set my fork down slowly. I could feel Lysander tense beside me, ready to intervene. I met her eyes. I let the silence stretch for just a heartbeat, just as Althea had advised. "It is true," I said, my voice clear and carrying in the hush. "I faced Gorfang, but I did not face him in the pit alone in the end." I turned my head slightly, my gaze meeting Lysander's. A charged, silent communication passed between us. I looked back at the woman. "The king ended that fight. He ended my captivity. I owe him my life." It was the perfect answer. It acknowledged the horror, credited the king, and revealed nothing of my shift, of the white wolf. It was a human story, of rescue, and it left them wanting more. The woman blinked, disarmed by the simplicity. Murmurs of approval rippled through some of the crowd. A story of royal heroism was always palatable. But as the music swelled again and the focus reluctantly shifted away, I caught a different look from across the hall, not from the high table, from the shadows near a side entrance. a servant clearing a platter. His eyes met my own for a fraction of a second too long. They weren't curious or odd. They were hard, calculating. And then he was gone, vanished into the press of bodies. The chill that went through me had nothing to do with the drafty hall. It was the chill of a hunter's gaze. The feast was a spectacle, a political theater, but in the shadows, the real game was still being played. The beacon had been lit, and the predators had just entered the hall. The feast stretched into an eternity of forced smiles and measured sips of water. Every laugh felt like a potential mockery, every glance a hidden blade. The servant's chilling look had shattered any illusion of safety. I was a jewel on display, and every thief in the kingdom was casing the vault. Lysander played his part flawlessly. He was the gracious king, engaging lords in talk of harvest yields and border patrols, his laughter booming at the right moments. But his attention was a net cast over the room, and I was at its center. I felt the subtle pressure of his leg against mine under the table, a constant silent check-in. I am here. When the tables were finally cleared for dancing, a fresh wave of anxiety crested within me. This was a ritual I had no part in, a language of steps and touches I didn't speak. Lord Balthazar arose, his movements smooth as oil. He approached the high table and bowed first to Lysander, then to me. "My king, Lady Alara, would you do me the honor of opening the dance?" It was a masterful trap. Refusing would be a grave insult, confirming my lack of grace. Accepting would mean placing my hand in the spider's lair. Lysander's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly.
Before he could formulate a diplomatic refusal, I spoke. My voice was quieter than I wished, but it carried. "You are most kind, Lord Balthazar, but I fear I would be a poor partner. My education did not include such refinements." I offered a small, regretful smile. It was the truth, wielded as a shield. Balthazar's cold eyes gleamed. "A tragedy, to be sure. Perhaps another, then, one of our younger lords, eager to instruct?" He was pushing, trying to force me into the vulnerable position of being led, of being taught. Lysander stood. The movement drew every eye. "The lady has had a long journey and endured much," he said, his voice silencing the murmurs. "I think she has earned the right to observe rather than perform." Then he turned and offered his hand to me. "However, I find I have little patience for watching. Ilara, would you walk with me? The gallery above is less crowded." It was a rescue and a statement. He was choosing my company over the dance, over the politics of the floor. A ripple of surprise went through the court. I placed my hand in his, relief making my fingers tremble. I would like that. He led me away from the high table, through a side arch, and up a narrow, spiraling staircase that led to a vaulted stone gallery overlooking the hall. The noise and heat faded to a distant rumble. Up here, it was just the two of us, the cold stone and the panorama of the court below, swirling like brightly colored fish in a torchlit pond. We stood at the balustrade, watching in silence for a moment. The distance made the scene feel less threatening, more like a strange, elaborate play. "You handled Balthazar well," Lysander said, his voice low. "I told the truth," I replied, watching a noblewoman's emerald skirt swirl. "It seems to be my only reliable weapon here." "It is a powerful one. They are so used to lies that truth disarms them." He leaned his forearms on the stone, his shoulder brushing mine. "You see them down there? The one in yellow, laughing too loudly. He's deep in debt. The old man by the hearth, pretending to sleep. He hears every secret in the kingdom. The young warrior, trying not to stare at the merchant's daughter. His father will disown him if he marries beneath their station." I looked at him, surprised. "You see all that?" "It is my job to see, to understand the gears and the weights. He turned his head toward me. And you, Ilara, what do you see? I looked back down, seeing with new eyes, not just opulence, but tension, not just laughter, but performance. I see a different kind of arena. The sand is polished marble, the weapons are words, but the stakes feel just as high. He nodded, a grim satisfaction in his eyes. Exactly. He hesitated. There was a servant near the eastern entrance. Did you see him? My blood ran cold. So he had noticed too. Yes, he didn't look like the others. No, Lysander agreed, his voice turning to ice. He didn't. Varya is having him located, but he vanished. A professional. Borak? I whispered the name like a curse. Or someone Borak hired, or someone else entirely, drawn by the scent of opportunity. He pushed off the balustrade, facing me fully. This is what I brought you into, this endless vigilance, this shadow war. You didn't bring me into it. I met him, his stormy gaze. My existence started it, the moment I shifted. I took a shaky breath. I'm sorry. Don't. The word was sharp. He reached out, his fingers hovering near my cheek before he seemed to think better of it, and let his hand fall. Do not apologize for being who you are, for surviving. This war was always coming. Borak's rings were a festering wound. You are just the light that showed me how deep the infection had gone. His expression was fierce, protective. You are not a burden, Ilara. You are a catalyst for change, a painful, necessary one. His words should have comforted me. Instead, they felt like a sentencing. My life, my freedom, reduced to a historical catalyst. Was that all I was? A spark for his war? As if sensing my despair, his tone softened. Come, there is something I want to show you away from all of this. Intrigued despite myself, I followed him further along the gallery to a small, unassuming door. He produced a heavy key from his belt and unlocked it. Beyond was not a room, but another, narrower staircase leading up into darkness. We climbed in silence, the sounds of the feast disappearing entirely. At the top was a final door. He pushed it open, and a blast of freezing, clean air greeted us. We were on the very roof of the keep, at the highest point of Ironhaven. The world opened up in a breathtaking, terrifying panorama. The city was a spill of golden light below. Beyond the walls, the land stretched into an infinite, moon-washed blanket of forest and hill, silver and black. The sky was a vast dome of stars, so clear and close I felt I could touch them. The wind roared in my ears, scouring away the scents of perfume and politics, leaving only pine and ice and sky. I gasped, stumbling forward a step, my hand going to my throat. It was the opposite of the cage. It was absolute, dizzying freedom. This, Lysander said, his voice carried away by the wind, so I had to lean closer to hear, is my favorite place in the world. When the weight of the crown is too heavy, when the lies in the halls below are too thick, I come here. It reminds me of the scale of things, that kingdoms rise and fall, but the mountains endure, that our schemes are so very small. I understood. Up here, the hall was a dollhouse, the plotting lords were insects. My own fears felt both magnified by the vastness and shrunk into insignificance. It's beautiful, I breathed, the wind whipping my words away. It is truth, he said, standing beside me, his cloak snapping like a banner. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the horizon. I brought you up here because you need to know there is more to this life than the game downstairs. There is this, there is space, there is silence. This too can be yours, if you choose it. He wasn't just talking about the view, he was talking about a partnership that could rise above the pettiness, a bond that could exist in this cleaner, wilder air. The bond in my chest swelled, feeling the truth of his words. For the first time, I saw a future that wasn't just a choice between a cage and a battlefield. There was a third path, a high, cold, breathtaking path, with a king who saw the world from the same lonely height.
But as I looked out at the moonlit wilderness, a dark shape detached itself from the forest edge, far, far beyond the walls. It was too distant to make out, but it moved with a purpose that wasn't natural. A scout? A signal fire? The peace of the heights shattered. The view wasn't just beauty, it was also a strategic vantage, and it showed me that the world beyond the walls wasn't just wild, it was watching, waiting. Lysander followed my gaze, his body going still. He saw it too. The moment of shared peace was over, stolen by the reality below.
"We should go back down," he said, his voice once again that of the king. "The feast will be ending soon." As we descended from the realm of stars and truth back into the world of whispers and silver, the memory of that dark, moving shape stayed with me. The rooftop had shown me a possibility, but the world below, it seemed, was not done reminding me of the price. The game was waiting, and it was time to return to the board. The morning after the feast, the sun tower felt different. It was no longer just a refuge, it was a command post. The memory of the calculating servant, the dark shape on the horizon, they had seeped into the stones. The gilded cage now had visible bars. Varya arrived as I was picking at breakfast. Her expression was grim. "The servant has not been found. He was a hireling, not one of our regular staff, paid in foreign coin. The trail ends at the eastern gate." She didn't need to say it. Borak's reach was longer and his methods slicker than we had hoped. "The king wishes you to begin training today," she continued, her tone leaving no room for debate. "In the royal sparring grounds, afternoon." Training, not etiquette. Combat. My heart gave a traitorous leap of something that felt dangerously like excitement. Action. Purpose. Something my wolf understood. The royal sparring grounds were a wide, sandy courtyard nestled within an inner bailey, shielded from the eyes of the city by high walls. The sand here was clean, raked smooth, not stained with old blood. When Varya and I arrived, Lysander was already there. He had shed his royal finery for simple leather breeches and a linen shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He was practicing alone, a long, blunted practice sword in his hands, moving through forms with a lethal, controlled grace. The sun-morning sun glinted off the sweat on his brow, highlighting the powerful cords of muscle in his arms and back. This was not the king of court. This was the warrior of the Blackwood. He saw us and lowered the sword, his chest rising and falling steadily. "Alara, good." He tossed the practice sword to a waiting attendant and picked up two shorter, lighter wooden blades. He tossed one to me. I caught it clumsily, the weight surprising me. "We start with the basics," he said, walking to the center of the sand. "Stance." For the next hour, he was not my mate, not my king. He was a relentless, patient drill master. He adjusted my footing, criticized my grip, demonstrated the same simple movement of forward thrust, a parry, over and over until my muscles screamed. "You're thinking too much," he said, after I failed to block a gentle swing for the 10th time. "Your body knows more than you give it credit for. You've survived. That instinct is in your bones. Stop trying to be a student. Be a survivor." He came at me again. This time, instead of trying to remember the proper angle for the parry, I reacted. I ducked under his swing, not with grace, but with the desperate speed of someone avoiding a blow in a crowded cage. I came up inside his guard and shoved the pommel of my practice sword toward his ribs. He blocked it easily, but he stopped, a spark of approval in his eyes. Better. Ugly, but effective. Again. We moved from drills to a slow, controlled spar. The world narrowed to the circle of sand, the sound of our breathing, the clack of wood on wood. It was exhausting, infuriating, and utterly absorbing. For the first time since arriving in Ironhaven, I wasn't thinking about politics or bonds or hidden enemies. I was thinking about the next move, the shift of his weight, the opening in his defense. I landed a strike on his forearm, a light tap but a hit.
He stepped back, lowering his sword, a genuine smile breaking across his face. Good. The praise, simple and earned, warmed me more than any pretty compliment from the court could ever. We took a break, drinking water from a shared skin. He sat on a bench, and I sat on the sand a few feet away, too tired for propriety. You learn quickly, he observed. Not just the moves, the mindset. I had good motivation in my previous education, I said between gulps of water. Failure meant more than a bruised ego. He nodded, his smile fading. That is the teacher I wish you never had. He looked out over the grounds, his expression turning thoughtful. Borak's attack, it was a message, but also a mistake. He revealed he is willing to act boldly, recklessly. That makes him dangerous, but also predictable. You think he'll try again? I stated, the chill returning. I know he will, but not here, not directly. He'll look for a weaker point, an ally he can suborn, a resource he can cut off. His gray eyes found mine. Or he'll try to turn the court against you, to make you seem more liability than asset. Like Balthazar? I whispered. Balthazar plays his own game, Lysander said, his voice hardening. But his goal is stability for Ironhaven, under his influence. Borak's goal is chaos for his profit. Their methods may sometimes align, but their ends are different. We must be wary of both. He stood, offering me a hand up. I took it, his calloused palm rough against mine. Enough for today, but we will do this again, regularly. A queen who cannot defend herself is a queen in name only. Queen, the word hung between us, heavier than the practice sword. He had never said it so directly before. As we walked back towards the tower, a messenger came running, bowing hastily to Lysander. My king, a rider from the northern border. The Frostmaw pack reports incursions, livestock taken, patrols harassed. They believe it's Bloodfang raiders testing their defenses. Lysander's face went utterly still. The warrior king was back. Summon the war council, Captain Kalin, Varia, Balthazar, in the map room in 1 hour. He turned to me, the brief connection of the training ground severed by duty. Varia will see you back. He was already striding away, his mind on borders and armies. Varia fell into step beside me. The game changes, she said quietly. Borak doesn't just send assassins to feasts. He probes for weakness in the kingdom itself. He's trying to stretch us thin, to see where we break. We entered the sun tower. The quiet rooms felt oppressive again. The physical exertion had been a release, but now the mental shackles were back, tighter than ever. I went to the window, looking out not at the beautiful valley, but north, towards where a pack called Frostmaw was under threat. Because of me, because Borak wanted to pull Lysander's attention, his resources, away from the center, away from protecting me. A cold, clear resolve crystallized within me. I was tired of being a piece to be moved, a prize to be fought over, a weakness to be exploited. Lysander was teaching me to wield a sword, but the real battle wasn't on a sparring ground. It was in the map room, where they decided the fate of packs based on strategy and resource. I was a liability because I was only seen as something to be protected. That had to change. I turned from the window. Varia, I said, my voice firm, when the war council is over, I need to speak with the king, alone. She raised an eyebrow, but nodded. I will convey the message.
I didn't know what I would say. I didn't have a plan. But the lesson in steel had taught me more than how to parry. It had taught me that waiting to be acted upon was a form of surrender. Lysander saw me as a potential queen. It was time I started acting like one. Not for a crown, but for survival. Not just mine, but for those like the Frostmaw pack, who were now suffering in the shadow of my existence. The game had changed, and this time I would not just react. I would make a move of my own. The hours after the War Council were a slow, burning torment. I paced the Sun Tower's sitting room, the taste of my own resolve turning metallic with anxiety. What could I possibly offer? I had no armies, no wealth, no political alliances. All I had was a story and a secret. When the door finally opened, it was Lysander. He looked weary, the lines around his eyes deeper than they had been that morning on the sparring ground. He carried the scent of tension and old parchment. "Elisa said you wished to speak with me," he said, closing the door and leaning against it. The informality was a sign of his exhaustion. "If this is about the training, we can continue tomorrow. I'm afraid the Frostmaw situation—" "It's about Frostmaw," I interrupted, stopping my pacing to face him. "It's about Borak. It's about me." He frowned, pushing off the door. "Ilara, you are not to blame for his actions." "But I am the cause," I insisted, my voice low and urgent. "He's attacking your borders because he wants to pull you away, to divide your strength, to make protecting me a burden your kingdom cannot afford." I took a step toward him. "You said I could be a strength, so let me be one." A flicker of confusion crossed his face, followed by wariness. "What are you proposing?" The idea, half-formed and terrifying, tumbled out. "Send me to Frostmaw." The silence that followed was absolute. His expression went utterly blank, then hardened into something dangerous. "Absolutely not." "Hear me out," I pleaded, my heart hammering. "Borak's raiders are testing a weak point. You send troops, it's a predictable response. He expects that. But if you send me—" "Into a war zone? As a target?" His voice was a low growl, his composure cracking. "Have you lost your mind?" "No, as a symbol." The words came faster now. "The white wolf, the one he tried to break in his arena, now standing with one of your allied packs. It's a direct challenge. It shows you are not hiding me away, you are deploying me, that your protection extends beyond these walls. It shows Frostmaw they are valued, and it dares Borak to come and take me from the middle of a fortified, allied pack, surrounded by loyal warriors." He stared at me, his stormy eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning horrified comprehension. "It's a trap. You're offering yourself as bait." "I'm offering myself as a standard," I corrected, my voice trembling but steady. "A flag to rally around. Bait implies passivity. I won't be passive. I'll train with their warriors. I'll stand on their walls. Let them see I am not a fragile treasure, but a living part of your kingdom's defense." He began to pace, a mirror of my earlier agitation, his hands clenching and unclenching. "The risk is astronomical. If anything happened to you—" "The risk is everywhere," I shot back. "A hired knife in a feast hall, poison in my food, an accident in the gardens arranged by one of Balthazar's allies who thinks I'm too much trouble. At least in Frostmaw the threat is known, it's out in the open, and I will be surrounded by wolves whose loyalty is to you, not to court intrigue." He stopped pacing, his back to me. His shoulders were rigid with tension. "And if he does take the dare, if he throws everything he has at Frostmaw to get to me, then he reveals his full strength, far from his own territory, on ground you choose to defend," I said quietly. The strategic truth of it hung in the air. It was bold, maybe foolish, but it had a brutal logic. It turned my perceived weakness, my status as the ultimate target, into a potential tactical advantage. Lysander turned slowly. His gaze searched my face, looking for hesitation, for fear. He saw only the fierce, desperate certainty I felt. "Why?" he asked, his voice raw. "Why would you volunteer for this? After everything, why step into another fire?" I met his eyes, letting him see the truth. "Because I am tired of being the reason others are in danger. Because I would rather face the wolf at the gate than the snake in the grass. And because—" I swallowed, the final reason the most terrifying to admit. "Because you said this bond was a partnership. Partners share the burden. They stand on the front line together, not one hiding behind the other."
The anger and fear in his eyes slowly melted into a look of profound, staggering awe. He closed the distance between us in 2 strides, his hands coming up to cradle my face. His touch was not possessive, but reverent. "You are extraordinary," he breathed, his thumb brushing my cheek. "Brave to the point of madness." "Is that a yes?" I whispered, my resolve wavering under the intensity of his gaze, under the warmth of his hands. He closed his eyes, resting his forehead against mine. A shudder went through him. The king warred with the man, the strategist with the mate. I could feel the conflict through the bond, a torrent of protective terror warring with a grudging, furious respect for the plan's cold elegance. After a long moment, he pulled back. His eyes opened. The storm in them had calmed into a steely, determined resolve. "It is not a yes, not yet. It is a, we will consider it." He released my face, his hands dropping to my shoulders. "If this is to happen, it will be on my terms, with the heaviest guard I can spare, with contingency plans you cannot imagine, and you will train every hour until we leave, not just with a sword, tactics, signals, escape routes. You will become a soldier in truth." Relief and a sharp, thrilling fear flooded me. He was considering it. He was taking me seriously. "I will. I'll learn everything." "You'd better," he said, his tone grim. "Because if I agree to this, Ilara, you are not just bait. You are a commander of a crucial defensive operation. The lives of every wolf in Frostmaw will be in part in your hands. The stakes are no longer just your survival. Do you understand that?" The weight of his words settled on me, heavier than any crown. This was no longer about proving a point. It was about responsibility. I nodded, my throat tight. "I understand." He studied me for a final, long moment, then gave a single, sharp nod. "We begin at dawn, not in the sparring grounds, in the map room. Your first lesson, the geography of the northern border and the disposition of the Frostmaw pack." He turned and left, the door shutting softly behind me. I stood alone in the center of the room, my knees weak. I had done it. I had moved a piece on the board, a piece called myself, into the most dangerous square.
The fear was there, cold and clawing. But beneath it, for the first time since the shifting sands of the arena, I felt a sense of agency, of purpose. I was no longer a prize to be won or a problem to be solved. I was a player, and I had just made my opening move. The Queen's Gambit. A risky opening, sacrificing a pawn to gain control of the center, but I was no pawn. I was the queen, and I was finally stepping onto the board. The game for the kingdom had truly begun, and the next move would be made in the frozen north. Dawn in the map room was a different creature than dusk. The weak winter light filtered through high, narrow windows, painting the vast territorial maps in shades of pale gray and gold. It was a room of cold, hard facts, and today I was here to learn them. Lysander was already waiting, along with Captain Kalen. A third person was present, an elderly wolf with spectacles perched on his nose and fingers stained with ink. Master Doran, the royal cartographer. "The first rule of strategy," Lysander began, without preamble, pointing to a massive map of the northern territories pinned to the central table, "is to know the ground better than your enemy. You are proposing to stand on this ground." His finger tapped a point marked Frostmaw Hold. It was a small, stout symbol nestled in a valley between 2 jagged mountain ranges. So you will learn it until you can walk it in your sleep. For the next 3 hours, Master Doran's soft, precise voice became my world. He spoke not of politics, but of dirt and stone. "The Frostmaw Valley is narrow here, see? A natural funnel. Their hold is built into the cliffside on the western pass. The eastern approach is more open, but marshy until the first hard freeze, which has already occurred. The river here," his bony finger traced a blue line, "is swift and shallow, fordable in only 3 places, all watched by Frostmaw sentry towers."
I listened, absorbing the information like a dry sponge. The elevation lines, the forest density marks, the symbols for watchtowers and granaries. This was the language of power, more concrete than any courtly flattery. Kalen took over, his voice a soldier's bark. The Frostmaw Alpha is Gunner, old school, tough, loyal, what's stubborn. He runs a tight pack of about 300 warriors, mostly close combat specialists. They're proud. They won't like the implication that they need help, especially not in the form of a— He hesitated, glancing at me. A sheltered royal guest? I supplied, my eyes still on the map. Aye, Kalen said, his respect for my bluntness showing in a slight nod. Your presence will be an insult if not handled correctly. You must arrive not as a burden, but as an asset, a symbol of the king's personal commitment. Which is why you will travel with a company of the Silver Guard, not an army, a guard, a statement of protection, not occupation, and you will carry a personal missive from me to Gunner. He produced a sealed scroll from his belt and placed it on the map, right over Frostmaw Hold. It does not order, it requests. It asks that he extend the protection of my emissary. Emissary, another careful word, not mate, not queen, a diplomatic representative. It was smart. It gave Gunner a role, a dignity in my protection. And if Gunner refuses the request, I asked, looking up. Lysander's gaze was flinty. He won't. He owes me a blood debt from the last Ridge War. He is honor-bound. But he will not be happy about it. You must win his pack's respect quickly. They respect strength, competence, and grit. Show no fear, show no arrogance. Show them you understand the value of the ground they are holding. He moved around the table, pointing to various marks. These are the reported raid sites, scattered, probing. Borak is looking for a soft spot. He's also likely trying to lure a contingent of my forces north to weaken our center. He looked at me. Your presence may be the very lure he wants, but we will turn it. We will make Frostmaw Hold a fortified knot he cannot untie, and his frustration will make him reckless. The plan was taking shape, not as a simple journey, but as a multi-layered campaign. I was a piece, but a critical, active piece. The responsibility was a crushing, exhilarating weight. For the rest of the day, and the days that followed, my life became a relentless cycle. Mornings in the map room with Doran and Kalen, afternoons in the sparring grounds with Varya and her most ruthless drill sergeants, learning not just to fight, but to fight as part of a unit, to understand hand signals, to defend a position. Even evenings spent with Althea, learning field medicine, how to staunch a bleeding wound, how to identify poison, how to stay alive long enough for a real healer to arrive. I was being remade. The raw survival instinct of the pits was being honed into disciplined skill. The fearful girl was being forged into something harder, sharper. Late one evening, exhausted and sore, I found Lysander waiting for me in the Sun Tower sitting room. He held a small, flat wooden case. You have learned the map of the land, he said. Now you need the map of the people. He opened the case. Inside, nestled on dark velvet, was a stunning piece of jewelry, a brooch. It was a stylized, howling wolf's head wrought in dark iron, but its eyes were two chips of pale moonstone that gleamed with a soft inner light. It was beautiful, stark, and undeniably powerful. This is the mark of the emissary, he said, lifting it from the case. It is older than my reign. It grants the bearer the authority to speak with my voice in matters of defense and alliance. It is rarely given. He stepped closer. If you take this, you are no longer just my guest or even just my claimed mate. You are an extension of my will. My sovereignty travels with you. Do you understand the gravity? I stared at the brooch, the moonstone eyes seeming to watch me. It was a tool, a key, and a target all in one. Yes, I whispered, the vow feeling sacred. He nodded, seeming to etch my face into his memory. Then get some rest, emissary. Your most difficult battlefield lies ahead, not of sand or snow, but of winning the hearts of wolves who have no reason to trust you. After he left, I stood before the mirror looking at the girl with the iron wolf brooch on her shoulder. Her eyes were shadowed with fatigue, but they held a new light, a determined, steely light. Alara, the captive. Alara, the guest. Alara, the survivor. Now, Alara, the emissary.
I touched the cool metal of the brooch. The final piece was in place. The gambit was set. In 2 days, I would walk out of the gilded cage of Ironhaven and into the frozen, waiting jaws of a different kind of trap, one I had helped design. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but it was now joined by something else, a fierce, defiant hope. I was not going north to hide, I was going to stand. And for the first time, I would stand not just for my own life, but for something bigger. The game was escalating, and the white wolf was finally on the move. The dawn of departure was a razor's edge of frost and silence. In the main courtyard, a company of Fiftel silver guards stood in perfect, still ranks, their breath pluming in the glacial air. Their armor was not the showy silver of parades, but a dull, practical gray, etched with subtle, protective runes. Varya moved among them, a final, quiet check of straps and supplies. This was not a procession, it was a deployment. I descended the tower steps, no longer in gowns. I wore fitted leathers lined with fur, sturdy boots, and a thick, hooded cloak of charcoal gray. The mark of the emissary was pinned firmly over my heart, its moonstone eyes the only flash of light on my person. I carried no sword. My training was too brief, but a long hunting knife rested at my hip, and Varya had insisted on a small, wicked crossbow strapped to my saddle. Lysander awaited me by the great gates. He was in full regalia, the crown of iron and sapphire upon his brow, a king seeing his forces off. But his eyes, when they found me, held no ceremony. They were the eyes of the man on the rooftop, full of a storm he could not command. He stepped forward, and the courtyard, already quiet, fell into absolute stillness. "Emissary," he said, the title formal, but his voice thick. He took my hand, not to kiss it, but to press something cold and heavy into my palm. I looked down, and it was a ring, a band of dark iron, matching the brooch, set with a single tiny chip of the same moonstone. "A focus," he murmured, for my ears only. "If the bond, if you need to find your center, or if you need me to find you." He closed my fingers around it. The gesture was more intimate than any touch we had shared. I could only nod, the lump in my throat too large for words. I slipped the ring onto my finger. It was a perfect fit. He turned to address the company, his voice ringing out, clear and kingly. "You ride north with my voice and my vow. Protect the emissary as you would protect the heart of Ironhaven itself. Heed her words, uphold her authority, bring honor to your shields, and return safely to your hearths." A unified fist thumped against 50 chest plates in salute. The sound echoed off the stone like a drumbeat of doom and promise. Varya brought my horse forward, a steady, deep-chested mare with intelligent eyes. I mounted, the movements feeling more natural after days of practice. Lysander placed a final hand on my horse's neck, his gaze locking with mine one last time. 1,000 words hung unspoken in the frozen air between us. Then he stepped back. "Open the gates." The massive hinges groaned. The world beyond was a sheet of white under a leaden sky. The north wind rushed in, biting and eager, carrying the scent of pine and deep, untracked snow. It was the smell of the wild, the smell of the hunt. Varya raised a fist. "Column, forward." And we moved. Hooves crunched on the icy cobbles, then thudded onto the frozen earth of the road. I did not look back. I kept my eyes on Varya's back, on the road ahead, on the brooch that sat heavy over my heart. With each step, the towering safety of Ironhaven shrank behind us. The journey was a lesson in endurance. The cold was a living entity, seeping through layers of leather and fur, burning the lungs with each breath.
The landscape transformed from Ironhaven's managed forests to a harsher, more ancient world. Trees grew twisted and thick, laden with snow. Rivers were plates of treacherous gray ice. The sky remained a constant, oppressive gray. We rode from first light until the last blue dusk, making camp in defensive formations. I ate the same travel rations as the guards, took my turn at watch under Varia's watchful eye, and fell into my bedroll each night so exhausted I dreamed of nothing but maps and the howl of the wind. The bond with Lysander was a strange, stretched thread. Sometimes, in the deep silence of the night watch, I would feel a pulse of warmth, of worry from far to the south. I would clutch the iron ring, and the connection would solidify, a silent reassurance across the miles. He was there. He was watching. On the fourth day, we saw our first sign of trouble, not an attack, but a scar. A small palisaded farming steading just inside Frostmaw's claimed territory. The gate was splintered, the pens were empty, the farmhouse was a blackened shell, still smoking. The silence was terrible than any sound. Varia mismounted, examining tracks in the churned snow and mud. Bloodfang, a small raiding party, 2 days old. They took the livestock, torched the rest. A message. My stomach turned. This was the reality of Borak's probing, not just lines on a map, but burned homes and stolen futures. The emissary's brooch felt like a mockery on my chest. Will the people? I couldn't finish. Frostmaw will have taken them in, Varia said, her voice hard. This is why we're here, to stop the next one. We pressed on, the sight of the steading burning a cold fury into all of us. The land began to rise, the air growing even thinner and sharper. Ahead, the twin peaks that guarded the Frostmaw Valley loomed, their tops shrouded in cloud. A horn blast echoed from the heights, a low, mournful sound that was answered by another, closer. Out of the tree line ahead, a party of wolves emerged on foot. They were big, clad in shaggy furs and mismatched armor, their faces wind-burned and grim. Frostmaw scouts. Their leader, a brute of a man with a beard woven with ice, stepped forward. His eyes scanned our company with open suspicion before landing on me. His gaze flicked to the brooch, and his scowl deepened. "Silver Guard," he grunted, his voice like grinding stones. "The hold is expecting you. Follow, and keep to the path. The marshes are hungry this season." He turned without another word, leading us off the main track onto a narrower, more treacherous trail that wound up into the rocky foothills. The Frostmaw scouts flanked us, their silence more hostile than any challenge. We were being escorted, and it felt very much like being delivered to a cell. Finally, as the short day began to fail, we rounded a sheer rock face and beheld Frostmaw Hold. It was not a beautiful castle. It was a fist of dark stone punched into the side of the mountain. Towers were short and thick, walls sloped to shed snow and battering rams. Smoke rose from 100 chimneys, clinging to the cliffs in the still, cold air. It looked exactly what it was, a fortress bred for survival, not for show, a place where grace died and only grit remained.
The gates, heavy ironwood banded with black iron, swung open. We rode into a cramped, steeply sloped courtyard. Wolves of all ages stopped their work to stare. The suspicion in the air was as palpable as the freezing mist. At the top of a short flight of steps stood Alpha Gunner. He was older than Lysander, his hair and beard a fierce white, but his body was still that of a warrior, broad and solid as the mountain itself. He wore a wolf pelt as a cloak, the head snarling over his shoulder. His eyes, a pale, frozen blue, swept over our company and pinned me where I sat. No one spoke. The wind moaned through the canyon, the only sound. I dismounted, my legs stiff with cold and nerves. I handed my reins to a guard and walked forward alone, stopping at the base of the steps. I looked up at the old Alpha, meeting his icy gaze without flinching. I said nothing. I merely placed my right fist over the moonstone eyes of the brooch on my chest, the salute of the emissary. A long, tense moment passed. The entire hold watched. Then Gunner's eyes flicked to the brooch, to the ring on my hand, and back to my face. He gave the faintest, almost imperceptible nod, not of welcome, but of acknowledgement. So, his voice boomed, cracking the silence like ice. The king sends us a symbol. Let us hope you are made of sterner stuff than moonlight, girl. The north wind here, it has a way of breaking pretty things. The challenge was thrown down, not with swords, but with words colder than the air. The real test had begun, not in the journey, but here, in this fortress of ice and suspicion. The gambit had reached the board, and my first move in the game for Frostmaugh's trust had just been made. Frostmaugh Hold was a world carved from ice and stubbornness. The corridors were narrow, dark, and smelled of smoke, damp wool, and packed earth. There were no tapestries, only cured hides stretched over stone to blunt the chill. It was a far cry from the soaring, sunlit spaces of Ironhaven. This was a place that had forgotten beauty in its fight to remember how to breathe. Alpha Gunner granted a shelter, but no welcome. We were given barracks space in a cold, drafty wing of the fort. The Silver Guard set up with disciplined efficiency, but the Frostmaugh warriors who passed by did so with pointedly averted eyes or outright scowls. We were an obligation, a political favor called in by a southern king they respected, but whose ways they clearly disdained. My quarters were a small, cell-like room adjoining the barracks, with a slit of a window and a pallet of straw. It was cleaner than the Bloodfang cages, but the message was the same: you are here on sufferance. The first morning, Varya and I were summoned to Gunner's Hall. It was a large, smoky room centered on a massive fire pit. Trophies of hunts, antlers, pelts, giant frost bear skulls adorned the walls. Gunner sat on a throne of sorts, carved from a single mammoth tusk, flanked by his grizzled beta and a severe-looking woman who was his head scout. "Emissary," Gunner grunted, not offering a seat. "You've seen our walls, you feel our cold. Now hear our problem. Borax snakes slip through the rocks like mist. They strike a steading, vanish. They pick off a patrol, disappear. We cannot catch them in the open. They will not meet us blade to blade. It is a war of gnats. And you," his frozen blue eyes pinned me, "are the brightest flame to draw them. So, what does the king's voice say we should do? Hide behind our walls while you shine?" It was a direct, hostile challenge to the entire premise of my mission. Varya tensed beside me. I stepped forward, closer to the fire's heat. "Alpha Gunner, the king's voice does not say to hide." I kept my tone respectful but firm, as Lysander had drilled me. "It suggests we change the game. They strike and vanish because they know the land's hiding places. We must know them better." The severe woman, named Hilda, snorted. "We have lived here for 10 generations, girl. We know every crevice." "But do you know where they are coming from?" I asked, turning to her. "Not just where they strike, their entry point, their trail back. They move like ghosts because you chase them from behind. We must be in front of them." Gunner leaned forward, interest cutting through his disdain. "Go on." I said, "We use the flame." I tapped the brooch on my chest, "but not as a stationary beacon, as a moving one. I will not sit in your hold. With a small, fast contingent of your best trackers and my guard, we will visit the outlying steadings, the remote watch posts. We will be visible but unpredictable. Borax scouts will report my movement. His raiders will have to adjust, to intercept, and when they move to where they think I will be," I looked at Hilda, "your hunters who know every stone will be waiting where they are." Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the fire. It was a variation of my original idea, but refined for this terrain, this enemy. It used me as bait, but active, mobile bait, turning the vastness of the territory from a disadvantage into a weapon. Hilda's eyes narrowed, calculating. "Risky, if they catch your party on the move." "Then we fight," Varya said, her voice flat. "My Silver Guard are not children, and the emissary can hold her own."
She said it with a confidence I didn't entirely feel, but I stood straighter. Gunnar stared into the fire for a long minute. Finally, he grunted. A hunt, not a war. I like it better. He looked at Hilda. Pick your 5 best, silent, deadly. They will guide the Southerners. He looked at me, a grudging new light in his eyes. You will leave at first light tomorrow. You will follow Hilda's orders in the wild, as if they were your king's, or you will freeze, or fall, or be killed. Understood? Understood. My heart pounding with a mix of terror and triumph. He had agreed. Not warmly, but he had agreed. The next week was a brutal education in a new kind of survival. We traveled light and fast, a party of 15, 5 Frostmow hunters, 10 silver guards, Varya and I. Hilda was a relentless taskmaster. She taught me how to read the snow for recent passage, how to move without sound on crackling ice, how to distinguish the scent of a frost pine from the subtler, wrong scent of a shifter lying in wait. We visited desolate steadings, their occupants wary but grateful for the show of force. We stood watch on lonely cliffs, the wind screaming around us. We were constantly moving, never sleeping in the same place twice. It was exhausting, miserable, and utterly exhilarating. The Frostmow hunters, led by a silent, sharp-eyed man named Rurik, began to treat me as a fragile package, but when I kept up on the marches, when I took my watch without complaint, when I didn't flinch the first time we found the remains of a raided supply cache, their attitude shifted. They didn't become friendly, but the hostility melted into a watchful, professional respect. One evening, as we huddled in a shallow cave eating frozen rations, Rurik nodded to the brooch on my cloak. Iron and moonstone, old magic. The king trusts you with much. I said, it is a heavy trust, my teeth chattering.
He would not give it to one who would break, he stated simply, and went back to sharpening his knife. It was the highest compliment I'd received in the north. The bond with Lysander was a thin, constant thread. In quiet moments, I would feel surges of emotion, concern, pride, a fierce protectiveness. I would clutch the iron ring, sending back my own pulse of determination, of cold, of gritty reality. It was a conversation without words, a sustenance more vital than the meager food. Then, on the 8th day, we found it, not the raiders, but their door. Hilda and Rurik had been scouting ahead. They returned, their expressions grimly satisfied. A pass, Hilda reported to Varya and me in a low whisper. Not on any of our maps. A crack in the mountains hidden by a waterfall that is now frozen solid. It makes a perfect, silent tunnel from the eastern wastes into the heart of our valley. This is how they come and go. This was the intelligence we needed, the key to the ghost attacks. We set the trap here, Varya said, her eyes gleaming in the twilight. At the valley end of the pass, we wait for the next hunting party to return. It was the moment we had been working towards, but as we made our plans, a new piercing cold entered my bones, one that had nothing to do with the wind. This was no longer a maneuver. This was an ambush. I would be the lure that drew living wolves into a killing zone. That night, as I tried to sleep in my bedroll, the faces from the Bloodfang arena flashed behind my eyes. Not the fighters, but the crowd, the roaring, bloodthirsty faces. Was I any better now, luring wolves to their death for a strategic advantage? A wave of warmth, firm and reassuring, flowed down the bond from the south. It was followed by a clear, silent impression, not words, but a feeling, a memory. The burned steading, the empty pens, the children who had huddled in Frostmow's halls, their homes gone. This was not sport. This was defense. The reassurance steadied me. This was the burden Lysander had spoken of, the weight of the brooch, the choice to stand. At first light, we took our positions. The Silver Guard and Frostmow hunters concealed themselves among the rocks and stunted trees that flanked the hidden pass's exit. I stood in the open, 20 paces away, my back to a large boulder, the hood of my gray cloak down, so my pale hair shone like a flag in the weak sun.
Varya was a shadow in the rocks to my left, her crossbow loaded. The wait was an eternity of cold and pounding heartbeats. The only sound was the moan of the wind through the rocky cleft. Then a scuff of stone, a muffled curse. They emerged from the dark mouth of the pass one by one, 6 shifters in lean, hungry-looking human forms, their clothes a mix of furs and stolen frostmail wool. They were carrying sacks of loot, smoked meat, tools. The last one out was their leader, a sharp-faced man with a scar across his lip. He froze the moment he saw me. His eyes went wide, then narrowed with instant, avaricious recognition. Well, well, look what the north wind blew in, the king's little ghost. A cruel smile spread across his face. Borak will pay a kingdom for you delivered quietly, but I think I'd rather hear you scream first. He shifted, his men following suit. 6 snarling, rangy wolves began to fan out, circling, cutting off my retreat. My breath came in short, sharp clouds. This was it. The trap was sprung, but I was the one standing in the open. I didn't look at Varya's hiding spot. I didn't signal. I met the leader's yellowed eyes and let my own fear solidify into a cold, glittering rage. I reached not for my knife, but for the ghost inside me, for the power I had hidden for so long. "Come and try," I whispered, the words lost in the wind. And as the first wolf lunged, I reached for the shift, ready to turn their trap into a slaughter they never saw coming. The game of bait and hunter was over. Now it was time for the white wolf to earn her keep.